this week, 11 members of Mexico's National Guard were picked up for illegally stealing Pemex crude oil. How would anyone ever know, whether you're in Canada or the US, if when you're making guacamole and you're about to eat, if those very avocados are coming from an orchard that has been taken over by cartels and caused a family to lose their entire business and livelihood? I'm Katarina Schultz. This is Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original. And today I'm going to be taking you guys through every single revenue stream that the cartels are using to amp up their profits and ensure that they're not solely relying on drug trafficking, human smuggling, and these sort of overt known illegal operations that they have going on. Now, over the past couple of months, the Mexican drug cartels have really ramped up operations that don't have anything to do with drugs. And that's because in the media and in governments and law enforcement, there has been an even stricter hawk eye on these cartel illicit operations. So let me take you through a few cases that we've seen go on over the past couple of weeks that have to do with the ways these Mexican drug cartels are being savvy about where they're getting their money from. Fuel theft, also known as huachicol, is the second most profitable source of income for the cartels. This has been going on for decades. We've seen headlines where pipelines, crude oil pipelines in Mexico that have been tapped into too many times or incorrectly have exploded, devastating communities and taking thousands of lives. And this continues on. Certainly over the past couple of years, the operations have become more intelligent. There seems to be this drop in the amount of explosions, but this doesn't mean that they're not doing this. Literally this week, 11 members of the National Guard, of Mexico's National Guard, were picked up for illegally stealing Pemex crude oil. For some context, Pemex is a state-run monopoly that controls all of Mexico's petroleum. And so anytime their pipelines are being broken into, it directly affects them as a business. They're actually bankrupt and are always cutting losses and talking about major issues that they're having in terms of making money and dealing with organized crime and trying to continue to operate while also dealing with cartels, extorting workers, stealing crude oil, and destroying by tapping into pipelines that run through typically rural regions. Now, these 11 members of the National Guard were literally caught red-handed escorting a fuel tanker in Guanajuato that was stealing and then transporting stolen crude oil. So basically, according to reports, someone called into police that a fuel theft was going on, which is not uncommon in Mexico, particularly in these sort of regions where there are a lot of pretty accessible fuel pipelines. And so when police showed up, the National Guard members tried to kind of play it off as they were making sure that it was safe. That wasn't the case. This was an illegal fuel theft operation. And time again, we see this happening where when an illegal operation is so lucrative, you will typically see collusion from law enforcement and government authorities. That's really the only way that something like this can function and can become as lucrative as it is. Now, fuel theft and trafficking this crude oil is the second most lucrative operation for cartels. It comes right after, of course, drug trafficking and smuggling. Now, no official numbers were released of just how much fuel was stolen or attempted to be stolen during this National Guard operation, but according to Pemex numbers, around 17,000 barrels of fuel is stolen per day. If you put that into perspective, just imagine how much fuel is being stolen across all of Mexico on a regular basis and just how profitable that becomes for the cartels, meaning they're able to pay off local officials to ensure that these operations run smoothly. They're paying off the people that are authorities at the border so that they can move this crude oil into the United States and sell it to those local American refineries. Earlier this month, the US Treasury literally sanctioned 3 Mexican nationals who are allegedly part of the CJ&G for running the operation of stealing crude oil and transporting it into the US through Texas. They were labeling this stolen crude oil as waste oil so that they can get it into the US. They were paying off and bribing, no, that is the same thing. They were bribing Pemex employees, bribing border officials, and had already set up a network so that once this crude oil that was labeled waste oil got into the US, they could essentially wash their hands of any worry or responsibility for the crime that they had committed and purely profit off of this oil that was now being used in the United States. Now, it's very important for me to mention that there are people that have been infiltrated on both sides of the border in order for an operation of this scale to even work properly. And so when the Treasury sanctioned these 3 individuals, it was said in the report that small oil companies in the US were complicit in buying this oil. Why? Because they were buying it at a lower price. Certainly, they knew what was happening. And there were complicit brokers ensuring that this deal went through. And I say this time and time again, and really just like with anything, whether it's US border officials that are accepting payments from the cartel to ensure that human and drug smuggling efforts go through smoothly. This is the same thing that's happening with this oil theft. And if you really think about it, oil theft is a lot easier to sort of lay low. Like it goes more under the radar because you aren't smuggling human beings, you aren't smuggling fentanyl pills, something that is so obviously illegal and can garner a lot of attention. This oil, once you label it as waste oil and it gets sent to the US, where a US-based smaller oil company has already made the payment and is waiting for it, I mean, come on. You would really have to think long and hard and have a lot of previous context to even crack down on something like this, which not only makes it a lot harder for border authorities, but also just for law enforcement that are looking for illegal activity. Veracruz, Puebla, Hidalgo, and Guanajuato are some of the most fuel-rich states in Mexico, and these are all states where we have long seen plenty of violent public outbursts. Now, these are places where a lot of Mexican authorities are on cartel payroll, and these are places where the cartel really has a strong presence. I mean, I'm in multiple group chats with Mexican law enforcement and other reporters who are constantly covering these areas, and I would say on a daily basis, I am getting alerts of extreme public displays of violence, shootouts, killings. The problem with fuel theft that I think a lot of us undermine is that, like with drugs and with human smuggling, human trafficking, you see this like blatant sense of violence and criminality to it. You know, we watch documentaries about it, we see shows about it, or any of the headlines and the reporting attribute the violence to the war on drugs. But in a sense, there is also an ongoing war on crude oil, a war on fuel. This is something that everybody needs, okay? It's not like drugs where you either are addicted to drugs or you recreationally use drugs, but not everyone can relate to that. Whereas everybody needs petroleum. And the cartels have certainly profit off of that. This is one thing about them, right? They will recognize a demand and they in some way or another, will always find a way to monopolize and profit off of the supply. This is exactly what they're doing with this crude oil and in these very oil-rich states, where for a lot of people who are living in these states also recognize just how lucrative this trade is. And if they're being paid off to ensure that these guys can tap into the oil lines and safely traffic it out of these states and into the US, they will do so. Even like morally, right? We're not seeing that same crackdown as we would see on like straw buying or the drug trade, because you look at oil and it's not an illicit substance. It's something that can easily be exported and trafficked. However, this doesn't mean that this is a casualty-free trade, because like I said at the beginning, thousands of people's livelihoods and lives have been lost due to this monopoly the cartels have gained over this necessary substance. Between law enforcement authorities, the military, the freaking National Guard, the cartels, and regular everyday people profiting off of something that is not viewed as an illegal substance, there will be no end to this fuel theft, and it is also very hard to crack down on if the Mexican or the US government does decide they really want to go hard on this. How do you do it? If something is being disguised as waste oil and can be trafficked so heavily under the radar and make these people so much money, I mean billions of dollars a year, it's hard to say if we will ever see an end to this, and this is a great way for the cartels to diversify their revenue, especially as there is a major crackdown going on at the southern border. When I first started reporting on organized crime, particularly in Mexico and the cartels, I was living in a region where agriculture was massive, okay? This is the green gold, the avocados in Michoacan, Nayarit, Jalisco. These are very soil-rich areas where a lot of people, particularly living in rural or like farmland areas, have farms, and these places have been part of the family for generations. I mean, it's very much like my father and his father and his father's father, where we have all been farmers, and for the most part, a lot of these people working in agriculture are truly making an honest living. Like, this is what they're dedicated to. Now, let me paint you a pretty tragic picture of just what it looks like when these cartels are taking over avocado orchards. First of all, it can take up to 15 years for a successful avocado tree to even bear fruit. That is if your tree succeeds, because a lot of the time you try to sprout this tree and it fails, it dies. It's a really hard fruit to actually like bear the fruits from, and it takes a very long time to grow. So a lot of these orchards have been in these farmer families for generations. What's been happening is armed men will show up to these farmers' homes, to their land, and tell them, you either pay me piso, so they're basically extorting them, pay me money to continue your operations, and it's not just a little bit, it's like 80% of whatever these farmers are making, or vacate your land, give it to me, and the cartel is now going to run this avocado trade from your farm. It's so tragic because for a lot of these farmers, even though they are making a decent living compared to like the national average, it's so much work. They've put in the work for generations. They're constantly continuing to put in the work and take care of this fruitful tree that is very hard to keep alive and actually profit off of. And then you have armed men coming to your door telling you, if you don't leave or pay me, you're dead and your land is mine. So in Michoacan, this has become a major problem, and it's literally the reason why avocados are called green gold, because it has become a product that everyone knows to be extremely lucrative and difficult to procure. And the cartels, knowing that, will go in and forcefully take this away from people. There are many people who have fled to capital cities or larger cities in Michoacan or in Jalisco or Nayarit that once had avocado farms for generations and had to leave because of the cartel violence, because they were direct targets of the cartel looking to take their land over. Now, once the cartels take over these orchards, how do they make it profitable, right? They're then exporting these avocados into the United States. And allegedly, there are certain produce companies that knowingly are buying avocados from orchards in Michoacan that are run by the cartels. I've had a few names sent to me through sources of literal produce companies that are knowingly sourcing all of their avocados from farms that are run by organized crime. Yet when I reached out for statements from them, of course, they told me to get lost. However, it's a lot cheaper for them to source it unethically, of course, because the cartels, even though they're making money off of this, are taking a bit of a pay cut in comparison to like legitimate farmers and farms, because they have to jump through a lot of loopholes in order to be able to export the avocados sort of illegally or to produce companies that know they're receiving their produce from cartel-run farms. One of the companies that I was told was importing avocados from Mexico knowingly from cartel-run farms was Mission Produce. Now, I reached out to them, which is why I'm mentioning this, and I'm going to read you the exact email. I asked them multiple questions, but the main one that I asked was, what protocols or safeguards does Mission Produce have in place to verify that your suppliers are operating independently of cartel control or coercion? I asked about 5 more questions. And the communications manager got back to me pretty quickly, the same day, actually, and told me, Katarina, thank you for reaching out. Unfortunately, we are unable to accommodate answers on the topics you mentioned. Thank you for understanding. As a company, wouldn't you want to clarify that you are literally not importing produce that is being run by cartels, that is being from a farm that's probably stolen from innocent people and is now being run by cartels to feed the American avocado consumer? Would you not want to try to, squash those claims? I have no words for that. Then, just last year, lime producers in Michoacan went on strike because they were so fed up with cartels trying to come in, intimidate them, extort them, and take their land. They went on strike, which led to this major increase in lime costs, but also a major gap in the supply because they weren't working. Nobody was supplying the limes to the US, and the limes that were going through were from some smaller farms that, of course, needed the money. And so costs completely skyrocketed. Who needs to take this on? The Mexican government. So basically what the Mexican federal government did was typical in their responses, but they deployed over 600 soldiers to these areas to try and protect these farmers and their land from being overrun by cartel control. So in typical organized crime fashion, the cartels found a loophole, and that was, instead of threatening these farmers and going for their land, they began threatening the U.S. inspectors that would come from the United States to Mexico to inspect the produce and the ethics of the way that all of this agriculture was working. These guys were getting threatened. So the U.S. then suspended inspections of Mexican-produced avocados at the actual orchards, which obviously led to concerns of like pest infestation, trade concerns, and ethics concerns. How would anyone ever know whether you're in Canada or the US if when you're making guacamole and you're about to eat or sit down for Super Bowl Sunday, which is the largest day of avocado consumption in the United States, if those very avocados are coming from an orchard that has been taken over by cartels and caused a family to lose their entire business and livelihood? Ask yourself that, because I think about it literally every time. All right, moving on to the next way that these Mexican cartels can diversify their revenue, and that is through cybercrime. This is something fairly new because the agriculture and the crude oil theft has been going on for decades, but as we move into this digital age, well, actually, we're in like the absolute throes of the digital age. As this happens, we have seen so many videos of just how savvy the cartels are with tech, whether that's like anti-drone technology or IEDs. Sure, in like typical warfare, we're seeing them being super savvy. But when it comes to like internet phishing and online scams or laundering money through remittance apps and cryptocurrency, this is something that these guys have literally become pros in, and they're also employing people internationally who are hacker experts and tech experts in every sense of the way to ensure that they can use technology and lack of cybersecurity to up their profits. In 2023, Mexico's Financial Intelligence Unit reported that the cartels were hiring tech experts to launder money digitally, show them how to do it, and also run online scams. Now, these are not the same scams that we've seen in terms of like recruiting people, like fake job posts or, trying to convince people, like online propaganda. These are legitimate scams, like when you're getting those scam phone calls that tie back to some African country like Nigeria or something, where it's like, we'll give you $60,000 if you wire X amount of money to this account, you're owed this. But these software engineers working for the cartels are literally running extremely intelligent scams. Typically, something that happened just recently, where a lot of Mexican nationals were getting very legitimate looking emails from what was said to be a government official or a government official body, asking them for their IDs and like personal information, where they would then have their identities completely stolen, which obviously works well for people in organized crime because that's something that they would typically need, especially if they're trying to leave the country, or they need some sort of other identity to run other illegal operations. And also asking these people for money or saying that they owed certain payments. Now, as we know, a lot of people fall for these scams, particularly older people. And this was the case when it came down to the people that were targeted by these scams, especially since this wasn't something super common in Mexico until the cartels started hiring these software engineers to run these scams online. The Sinaloa Cartel and CJ&G were both named in a 2021 U.S. Department of Justice indictment, which involved cryptocurrency wallets used to funnel drug money. So this blockchain analysis traced millions in Bitcoin and Monero transactions linked to cartel addresses throughout Mexico and throughout the United States. This was something that really pushed these cyber crimes forward and showed just how much money was not only being laundered, but being earned through cybersecurity crimes that the cartel was committing. And they were running it very well. It got to a point where both Mexican online intelligence units and American units were working together in order to track down who was committing these crimes and just how they were doing it, because a lot of their sources and IPs were perfectly hidden. And that is due to the fact that they were hiring experts. They are hiring experts. And this is a reason why the cartels are so well versed in making these types of like diverse forms of revenue so lucrative, because they become experts in it. Not themselves, but they hire experts. And right now, kind of going back to like the illegal way that they are making their money, right now there was a recent report that the Sinaloa Cartel started hiring, whether that was forced or not, hiring chemistry students from universities to learn how to make the precursors for fentanyl in order to cut out China. Imagine you as a criminal organization need to desperately diversify how you're making your money. How are you going to do this? If you know nothing about avocados, if you know nothing about cybersecurity or crude oil, you hire the experts. And if it's making you enough money, you can pay enough so that these people keep their mouths shut and do the job just as well as any expert. So while authorities are cracking down on human smuggling and drug trafficking, the cartels are going to continue to diversify their streams of income. Whether that's through produce or petro, they always find a way, and a very lucrative way. The question is, will there be a crackdown on crude oil theft or cartels taking over avocado orchards? It's hard to say because these aren't illicit substances. They're harder to crack down on. And if the cartels have their claws so deeply entrenched in these very lucrative forms, how could we even begin to imagine what a crackdown would look like on these other illicit forms of income for the cartels? It would take a lot of intelligence, which I think both Mexico and the US have the capacity to do, and it would take a lot of time. It would also take a lot of focus perhaps off of the drugs and the human smuggling. But with the amount of casualties we're seeing throughout a lot of the states that are oil rich or avocado rich, I think a lot of people living there who are just trying to make an honest living would love to see some sort of government intervention, or at least some sort of policy that could make them feel safer and maintain their honest living. Thank you so much for listening. This was another episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with me, Katarina Schultz. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'm always open to hearing your suggestions on what you want to hear about. And as always, see you soon.